We've got everybody here and we have a public speaker who will be on.
Okay, yeah, I see that. Okay, the chairperson's now back on, so let's see if we can hear him.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay, it's 6 o'clock. I want to welcome everybody. If we're all ready to go, I'd like to welcome everybody to our first person, or actually Zoom meeting in the past 4 months. It's Monday, March 14th, 2022, and we're about to get started. So what I'd like to do is call the meeting to order and do a roll call, Madam Deputy City Clerk.
Thank you. Commissioner Dever? Here. Commissioner Santos? That could be him joining now. We'll get back to him. Commissioner Steinbach?
I'm here.
Commissioner Stevens?
Here.
Commissioner Thompson?
Oh, he's still trying to connect.
Oh, is that him? We have a Jim on the line.
Yeah, that was Jim. I saw him earlier and then he jumped, he kind of
Okay,
zapped off, but I did see him sitting behind his desk.
so, all right, Vice Chair Graff
I'm here.
and Chair Camerata.
Here.
So Santos so far is not here and Jim is sort of half here. He's here, you know, more than in spirit, but not fully. So it looks like he's still, it's just perpetually joining from the waiting room. So,
There he is.
oh,
Hold on.
there we go. Okay. Well, we certainly have a quorum.
Okay, well, I'd say we can get started. I mean, I don't know how long it's gonna take him to connect. Maybe he can wave at least on the chat and tell us if he can hear people. I'll say, Jim, can you hear us at least?
Yes,
Jim,
Commissioner Thompson,
Jim.
are you,
can you hear us?
once, I don't know if in case he can hear us.
I just sent the chat out.
Oh, okay. I'd like him to let me know when he arrives because I may not see it. And if we're in the middle of an item.
I'm gonna tell him you may have to leave the meeting and re-enter.
Well, okay. Well, if he has to do that to be connected now, yeah. Okay.
Well, we'll see what happens.
Okay.
All right, well, let's get started. We want to welcome everybody. Again, this is our first Zoom meeting or planning commission meeting since November 15th. So we've got roll call done. Oral communications, item 2, persons wishing to address the planning commission on subjects other than those scheduled or requested to do so at this time. Please provide your name and address for the record. In order to conduct a timely meeting, we're going to have a 5-minute time limit per government code, yada, yada, yada. Madam Clerk, have you received any comments or any requests for oral communications?
I've received nothing in writing, but we do have, I believe, someone on.
There's Jim.
Okay, so is Jim live now?
Yeah, Jim's live. He just has to unmute.
There we go.
There you go.
Okay,
Hi, Jim.
thank you.
Welcome back.
Thanks.
I did the same thing, so we're good. It looks like we have
Yes, Donna Gardner should be on the call
Yeah.
I'm
and.
here.
Okay,
Mark,
so,
yeah, and Mark.
I'm
Campbell.
here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
okay, so this would be the time.
Okay.
Ms. Gardner, if you'd like to
Okay.
talk.
I can't turn the video on, but obviously you can hear me. I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to speak at this time. Again, my name is Donna Gardner. I live at 1840 West 262nd Street in Lomita. I have so my entire life. My husband and I have owned this property for over 20 years, and we have a storage container on our property, and we've had it here in excess of 8 years. We've been told by the city that we have to remove it. However, Los Angeles County allows them in their, we've followed all the rules according to Los Angeles County, and we want to know what we can do to go about keeping it. We've offered a facade, a foundation, buying permits, whatever is necessary. And I was told that I needed to bring it before this board to ask for them to be made legal. We've used, you've seen them used as homes. There's even a Taco Bell in Southgate made out of shipping or cargo containers. We simply want to continue using it to safeguard our property. I just wanted to go before you and ask to see if it could be put on some sort of agenda to vote, or I didn't, you know, I'm at a loss at this point, and I just am appealing to your board.
Okay, what, is that everything, Donna?
Well, pretty much it is. I just
Okay.
want to know how we can go about complying. I did see you in my backyard, Steve. Good to see you again. I didn't realize you were on the planning commission board.
Oh, well, hello again. But
Hello.
I don't think the commission can do anything about this evening, so I'm gonna turn it to Laura for a second, or Sherry, because I think it's gotta go through somebody at the counter, and I'll let either one of them speak on it.
And thank you, Mr. Chair. So
Mhm.
Ms. Gardner raises a question about whether containers are permitted in Lomita. And I will note that the city of Lomita has its own zoning ordinance, so we're different than LA County. And so we currently do not allow for cargo containers to be used on any property within the city. There may be some options though. So what I would suggest, Ms. Gardner, is if you can call me, or if you can provide your contact information in the chat, or perhaps the assistant city clerk already has your contact information, I can follow up with you. There are some very limited ways that you may be able to keep the container, but otherwise it is not allowed by the city. It is not on the agenda though for tonight's meeting, so the chair is correct. There's nothing that the planning commission can do this evening, but we'll follow up and we'll give you some options to consider.
I really appreciate that, ma'am. You suggested I be in contact with Miss Linda Abbott.
Yeah, if you can just make sure that Miss Abbott has your contact information, she'll provide it to me and then I will contact you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, you're very
Sure.
welcome. Have a good rest of the evening.
Thank
Sherry,
you.
Thank
Yes.
Sherry, this is Mike Graff. I'm assuming since they've had it there for so long, that there will be some consideration given to that. Since if it's been there for 8 years, I realize what the code says and everything, but I don't know how long the code has been in effect or anything else. I just hope that, and I'm sure you guys will be as open as you possibly can. That's all we can ask for. Thank you.
And we will be. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Sherry. Thanks, Mike. Thank you, Donna. And does Linda have the contact info? Okay, you do. Okay, perfect. Okay, Donna, you're more than welcome to stay on meeting if you'd like. If not, we're going to move. If there's no other persons wishing to address the planning commission.
No, I just really appreciate your time. I just know that I'm grateful.
Okay,
Thank you.
well, we'll have somebody at the city reach back out to you. How about that?
That's excellent.
Okay.
Excellent. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, you're
Mhm.
welcome. Okay,
Bye.
moving on. Item number 3, consent agenda. We have 2 sets of minutes that we need to approve this evening. November 8th, 2021 and November 15th, 2021 minutes. They're in your packet. Do I hear a motion for approval of those 2 minutes and a second?
Move for approval.
Okay, Joaquin, welcome.
Thank you, sir.
I'll second it.
Joaquin's made a motion. We're going to do this on one motion, so because it's one item, consent item 3A. Who was the
I
second? Mike?
second, Steve.
Mike? Okay. Madam Deputy City Clerk, if you can conduct a roll call vote, please.
Yes, thank you. Commissioner Dever,
Yes.
Commissioner Santos,
Yes.
Commissioner Steinbach,
Yes.
Commissioner Stevens,
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson,
Yes.
Vice Chair Graff,
Yes.
and Chair Camerata.
Yes.
That's 7-0 approved. Thank you.
Okay, very good. All right. Item number 4, it's the first item under public hearings. Item 4 is a site plan review number 1204, a request to extend approval for 1 year to allow the expansion of a parking lot in conjunction with the demolition of classrooms, office spaces, and non-conforming residential structures, and the construction of several small additions totaling 961 square feet located at 24716 Narbonne Avenue and 24730 Narbonne Avenue in the commercial or CG zone. The applicant is Mark Campbell, and the presentation will be done by Associate Planner Laura McMorrin. So Laura, it's all up on you now.
Thank you, Chair Camerata. Good evening, Commission. So tonight we're here to consider a 1-year extension of an entitlement for the Bay Church's proposed parking lot expansion and removal of some existing buildings and the addition. Linda, can you get the PowerPoint up, please? Great. Next slide. So the municipal code allows for an applicant to ask for an extension prior to the expiration of the entitlement, so long as that they're pursuing the application in a timely manner. The applicant has had their plans submitted to Building and Safety, has had numerous agencies approval, and they ran into a sticking point with the fire department's review. It specifically was that connecting the existing building to the proposed new space was going to trigger fire sprinklers for the existing space. The applicant in their attached letter has met with the fire department and has guidance as to how to make changes to their plans, and they do intend to follow up with this project. Next slide, please. And this just establishes the background of when they applied for the extension, which was prior to the 2-year expiration of their entitlement. Next slide. So there's been no changes to the municipal code regarding this entitlements development standards. So staff is recommending approval for a 1-year time extension. Are there any questions? The applicant is also attending tonight's meeting.
Thank you, Laura, for your presentation. And as Laura just asked, if there are any questions or comments from the commission, I'll start off. Vice Chair Graff.
None here, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Dever.
No, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Santos.
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner Steinbach.
Yeah, I have a quick question for Laura. So when you're saying a 1-year extension of time, is that to start work or complete work?
To pull permits, that includes grading. So
Okay,
it would be if they pulled their, building permits, which includes their demo or starts their grading. That's it.
okay, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Stevens.
I have nothing, thank you.
Okay, and Commissioner Thompson.
No questions, thank you.
Okay, excellent. So the applicant is on, Mark is on the Zoom meeting, and Mark, would you like to say anything about the extension request? Mark, can you hear us? He needs to unmute himself. I can just say, hi, Mark, please unmute. Please unmute yourself. Let's see if he sees that in the chat. Oh, there you are. Hi, Mark. Mark, can you hear us? Mark Campbell, can you hear us?
He's unmuted, but we can't hear him.
Yeah, I don't know what happened, so. Okay, well, we'll give another second. Mark, are you able to hear us? Okay, well, let's see if he comes back in. We can go to the public hearing if there's anyone on that wants to speak about this item. If there's any requests from the public on this one, Linda?
I'm sorry, no, I've received no written requests to, written comments, and there's no one else here unless Mr. Campbell would like to speak.
Right. Hey, Mark, can you hear us? Okay, well, I would say that we just keep pushing forward. And at this point, since it seems like it's going to be pretty simple, I would go ahead and close the public hearing, and then we can bring it back to the commission. If there's any other questions or discussions, I would like to go ahead and do a motion and a second for the request of an extension on site plan review number 1204.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to.
I'd like this-
Go ahead,
Go
Mike.
ahead.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I'd like to move that the planning commission approve the request for a 1-year extension of time for site plan 1204 to establish a new expiration date of February 10, 2023.
I'll second that.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second. Madam Deputy City Clerk, can you do the roll call, please?
Sure, thank you. Commissioner Dever,
Yes.
Commissioner Santos,
Yes.
Commissioner Steinbach,
Sorry, I have a problem with my mouse. Yes.
Commissioner Stevens,
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson,
Yes.
Vice Chair Graff,
Yes.
Chair Camerata.
Yes.
That's
I'm gonna get a
7-0.
t-shirt that says that, by the way.
Okay, well, when and if Mark does get his audio back, we'll let him know that his request for extension did pass unanimous 7-0. Okay. Moving on, the next item we're going to take up is a scheduled matter. It's item number 5, review of the housing element status and various housing related laws. There's actually no staff report, but I believe the presentation is going to be by interim Planning Director Sherry. So Sherry, it's all you. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
Mhm.
So actually, both Laura and myself will be part of this conversation, and I'm sure if needed, John will jump in and maybe even Lemesis. So first off, I wanted to give you an update in terms of the housing element. The Planning Commission, we appreciate all of your efforts last year to go through the public hearings and to recommend to the City Council that we adopt the housing element update. That was done by the City Council in December. So they took their last action on December 21st to approve the housing element. And then we submitted it to the state on January 11th for their review. Well, just last Friday, and I knew it was coming, the state did provide us a letter through the Housing and Community Development Department. And unfortunately, they did not certify our housing element. So I am still reading through their letter to basically understand where they want us to do some additional analysis and or provide additional information, which may ultimately lead to some additional programs or some slight tweaking of the housing element. Excuse me. When the Planning Commission and the City Council did recommend or approve the housing element, we did recognize that there might be some small changes because there pretty much always will be with HCD. But it is also possible that there are enough changes that we may have to bring it back to the Planning Commission and City Council. So we wanted you to be aware of that. I think generally, the housing element I thought was a very good document. I think Lomita did a lot to try to further both the preservation as well as the production of additional housing. As you remember, we have 829 units that were identified through the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. And our housing element actually proposed not only the 829, but we had a buffer of about 35%. If you considered all of the infill development and the rezoning and different programs and laws that we were anticipating passing. But I think for the state, you know, they're often working with cities where it's not always clear what can be accomplished because they're not as familiar with the local conditions. So they want us to really clarify existing conditions on some of the properties that we're looking to rezone and just how our new zoning or rezoning will be able to support the densities that we're projecting? I think those are fair questions, so we should be able to provide them that information. They're also asking us to provide more information on the affirmatively furthering fair housing. This is a fairly new requirement for the housing element. And I think frankly, most cities were trying to figure out what they wanted as we were writing, the housing element. I think we came close, but they're asking for some further clarification. So we'll report back to you probably at your next planning commission meeting in terms of what to expect for the housing element. Fingers crossed, maybe we won't have to start the hearings again, but if we do, we'll try to fast track it because it is our goal to try to have a certified element within, hopefully by summer. So going on to, first off, are there any questions on the housing element?
I have one, just
Yes.
a real quick one. The new several units that are being under construction or will be under construction soon, are those included in our numbers that we have to obtain, or were those already included in our numbers? Does that make
So
sense?
every year we do an annual progress report that identifies properties that have received entitlements, that have received building permits, and or have received occupancy authorization. So for those who receive building permits or occupancy during this planning time period, those would count for this housing element cycle. As an example, Pasern, because they received their housing, their building permits, and they will actually be occupied during this term, that counts towards our 829.
Yeah, I was thinking more of the units that are being built along Narbonne. I know there's several projects that are upcoming, and I didn't know if those numbers were included as well.
Right, so they haven't even started construction yet?
Right.
Right, if they haven't started construction, once they receive their building permits, we will then put them on our annual progress report. And so that will count towards our housing element goals.
Okay.
And it's likely that would, the ones that I think you're thinking of, I think those will happen fairly soon.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, we also wanted to bring some information about various housing laws, specifically the density bonus laws. I know there are 2 applications that are pending where each of the applicants are seeking density bonuses in exchange for providing affordable housing. So Laura's going to provide information regarding the density bonus law, and then we're going to follow up with having some discussion about ADUs, SB9, and how we treat our A1 and R1 zone districts. But let's go ahead and start with Laura.
Thank you, Sherry. Linda, would you pull up the slide, please? So density bonus is a law that's been around since 1976, and the state has modified it numerous times since then. And what it allows, what it is a state mandate, which in exchange for designating a certain percentage of the dwelling units as affordable, a development that meets requirements of state law is entitled to receive a certain number of additional units, as well as other benefits as a matter of right. Next slide. So the density bonus law requires that the rents remain affordable for a term of no less than 55 years. Next slide, please. So density bonus has a bunch of different scenarios, but at a minimum, the project has to have at least 5 units. And as a percentage of the rental, if they provide 5% at very low income, then it would qualify. Or if it's 10% very low income or 10% moderate income, it also can qualify for a bonus. There's also another program, or I should say allowance, for owner-occupied units for townhomes and condominiums. And that would be when a project designates 10% for moderate income households. Next slide, please. So in Los Angeles County, these are the income limits. So if it's a household of 1 person, the maximum income that household could have is $41,400. And these are annually updated, and they're based on our metropolitan area. Next slide, please. So density bonuses are awarded on a graduated scale. So as mentioned, if 5% of the units are restricted to very low income, then the bonus would be 20%. So they'd get a bump of 20% more units. So if it was 10, then they'd be receiving 12. And it again changes based on the percentage of the units and the income of the household that it is targeted at. Next slide, please. So there are other benefits, and the first is a parking reduction. The second are various incentives and concessions, and the third is a possible waiver or reduction. Next slide. So the parking, this is by right, that a project that is 0 to 1 bedrooms is required only 1 space. This is actually very similar to our mixed use requirement. For projects that have 2 to 3 bedroom units, it's 1.5 spaces. And for 4 bedroom units, they're each required 2.5 spaces. Next slide, please. So then there's an additional perk for projects that provide at least 11% of units at very low income households, or 20% of the units for low income households, and it's located within a ½ mile of a major transit stop. That means 15-minute intervals. The parking spaces that are required is 0.5 per unit. Western Avenue and PCH are the 2 arterial roads that have bus lines that meet this 15-minute interval. Next slide, please. So incentives and concessions, what are these things? They are reduced or modified site development standards or zoning code requirements. Other regulatory incentives or concessions proposed by development that result in identifiable and actual cost reduction to provide the affordable housing unit. Next slide. And here are some examples. So an incentive. Perfect. Thank you, Linda. An incentive could be increasing the height to add an additional floor because the project needs more space for the units. It could also be increasing the floor area ratio. Concessions are things like reducing the amount of open space, the setback, or other amenities that a municipal code specifies. Next slide. Incentives and concessions are awarded, again, based on certain criteria for the project. So if one is, has a project that has a lot of very low income units, it'll receive more incentives and concessions. Next slide, please. So waivers. Waivers are a little different, and this is how the government code defines whether a waiver is awarded. And this is on top of an incentive or concession, and it's if any development standard would physically prevent the project from being built at the permitted density, and with the granted concessions / incentives, the developer may propose to have those standards waived or reduced. Next slide. So who reviews? So projects are preliminary reviewed by staff, and then we review with the city attorney to make sure and determine that the project qualifies for the density bonus, that the number of bonus units are correct, that the proposed deviations, incentives, concessions, or waivers from development standards are correct, and that the waiver is demonstrating a need. Next slide. So the Planning Commission's role. The Planning Commission still reviews and approves the project for consistency with the general plan and zoning designation. It also approves and reviews the applicable development standards. So anything that hasn't been asked for as an incentive, concession, or a waiver. Next slide. Oh. And that kind of concludes my presentation. We could take questions now, or we could take questions after Sherry discusses ADUs and SB9.
Yeah, I think it's probably best to ask the questions now on state density bonus because it is a little bit different than the other things we'll be talking about.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation, Laura. Can you just go back one slide, Linda? I just want to make sure that everybody had a chance to read this right here. The commissioner's role in this. So, Laura, go over this again so everybody understands.
You know, and it's a little bit more limited of a role than what we usually have. I mean, we have the objective design development standards. And so those that aren't waived or deviated from based on state density bonus law, we still will be reviewing. So, you know, but there is limitations to what the commission gets to weigh on. And that's maybe, I'm not sure if John wants to speak more on this, but it's limited, I guess, is the bottom line I want to emphasize. We only can bring forward those things that have not been exempted out.
Laura, this is Mike Graff. You said, you indicated that this has been in effect since what, 1976 or something like that.
It has, it has, and there's been many versions.
Right, right. Now, how does it now differ from what we've been doing the past several years? I mean, are there some new items that are coming to the forefront from now that we haven't been had to consider in the past, you know, say 4 years or so, or their recent past?
Yeah, this state's recent version, which is actually a few years old, has liberalized it. And so it made it easier to use. I mean, granted, we are getting an affordable unit or affordable units towards our RENA numbers, but it is, they've opened things up a bit more to incentivize its use. We have not had a density bonus project previously in the city of Lomita.
Right, and I think that's important to recognize too, is that Lomita's never had to deal with this. You know, the developments that have come forward have all been market rate developments, so they have had to meet all of the city's requirements. But now, because of the state really incentivizing developers to do affordable housing by putting forward these types of laws, you know, we're now finding that there's both small as well as larger developers looking to take advantage of the state density bonus requirements. So I think, you know, given that we have 2 current applications pending, and these are both very small projects, I would anticipate certainly others will follow, especially once you start having any approvals at all. But I think it would be good for the city attorney's office to maybe talk about their experience and their understanding of state density bonus. Go ahead, John.
Thanks, Laura, and thanks, Sherry. Yeah, I mean, I think that the presentation gives a pretty good overview of, you know, state density. You know, it's obviously a very complicated area of housing, and particularly affordable housing. I think to talk about Laura's point real quick about the Planning Commission's role, I think the important thing to point out is the density bonuses and the concessions and the other assistance that the developer can seek. If they meet the requirements, it's state mandated, so the city doesn't really have much ability to wiggle. So if they meet the requirements, it's mandated that it has to be approved within the law, and there might be ways that the city can potentially get some development that they want, but ultimately, if they meet the requirements, it has to be approved. So to that extent, I think that, you know, Laura's presentation, you know, sets forth, accurately kind of what the commission stuck with when there is a project before them. I think potentially there could be, if there is ultimately a dispute or interpretation about whether it meets the requirements, that's one thing, but if it meets the requirements, it's not really much that the city can do. And I think in terms of experiences, from the city attorney's office perspective and dealing with other cities, this is a common thing. And often developers use this, to get more out of the project that benefits them. And from a city's perspective, if you're looking at the city as a housing crisis and the state in a housing crisis, getting affordable housing is a good thing. And I think the fact that there's been no affordable projects in the city that have been proposed, I think that this will be probably, as Sherry mentioned, a good step forward, and developers might follow suit in this. But kind of similar to what I'm sure Sherry will talk about with SB 9, the density bonus law is not something the city actively does anything with. It's on the developers to come in and seek the bonus and go through that process. So there's not really much the city can do in terms of like promoting this or actively, pushing this forward.
Yeah, although John, I think maybe to add on to that. So looking at the HCD letter, they actually want us to be more proponents for affordable housing. So they actually want us to outreach to developers to make sure we explain, some of these avenues that might be available. So developers who may not have even thought about the state density bonus law, if we explain it to them, they may be willing to incorporate inclusionary or affordable housing within their project. So while we don't really have, in the past, we've not really had an obligation to do so, the state really is asking us to be more of a cheerleader for affordable housing.
Does that mean,
Oh, there you go.
does that mean that the developer and or future owner, or however that would work out, has to maintain proof of the low income housing for 55 years? And do they have to report that to the city and the state? How does that work? If there's a requirement for it, how does the requirement get carried forward if they do that building and get a bonus?
Yeah, there are absolutely reporting requirements. And John, maybe you can talk a little bit about affordable housing agreements.
I'm sure, yeah. I mean, in terms of reporting requirements, I'm not sure off the top of my head what all the reporting requirements are, but there are extensive reporting requirements to ensure compliance. And I mean, affordable housing agreements are very complex, and they take a lot of time and effort. And I see Sherry nodding her head. And they're very complicated, and it is a way for the city to help, keep some sort of control and understanding of what's going on with the housing. So that's definitely a tool and mechanism that the city should use with this process as it goes forward with these two new projects.
But I will say, I'm sorry, if I just, excuse me, add something to that. So the affordable housing agreement is very important because it's a contract. So it basically has the obligations that the city will adhere to, but also really what that property owner will adhere to. But it's very important that the city actually monitors. I won't mention which city it is, but there is a city that I did some work for, and they probably had, 4 or 5 housing agreements, affordable housing agreements, that they frankly were not monitoring at all. And I would bet out of those 4 or 5, I have sufficient belief that there's probably at least 2 that they're not providing affordable housing, right? So they're still providing market rate housing, but nobody's checking. So they're just pocketing that money, that extra money. So the city will set up a process where on an annual basis, we will require a certification to be prepared, where not only the property owner, but maybe even the tenants will verify that they are income eligible and that they are paying the appropriate rents. And that also applies for properties that are for sale that are subject to affordability requirements. We will have to make sure that at any transition of ownership, that the title company is able to basically verify the standards and that the city is notified So that way we assure that the housing maintains its affordability. So.
Well, and one last question, since we're all new, a lot of us are very neophytes when it comes to this, but trying to understand if something is found to be incorrect, or they're not, the owner, builder, developer, whoever, is not upholding that agreement with the city, do they lose that status, or do they get fined, or what? There's probably a multitude of different things that can happen, but just generally speaking, how does it get corrected, or how is it taken care of?
Oh, I'll let John answer that. So what are our remedies?
Well, I mean, I guess if there's an affordable housing agreement, I mean, there's obviously you can have a breach of contract claim or something like that. I mean, I think if you're looking at, if they fall out of compliance with whatever the state mandates, you have violations of, the government code, you can go after them for that. Certainly you could do some sort of administrative fines or citations. So, I mean, I guess the lawyer answer is you have all available remedies under the law available to you. And I don't think you'd want to limit yourself to one thing, but I think it probably, to answer your question, Commissioner Graff, I think it would probably depend on the nature of the violation, factors such as if it was intentional, or if it was a negligent act or something like that, or if it was just a mistake, as well as if there's ways to correct it, or to cure it in some way. I think those will all be factors, but I mean, if somebody's violating an agreement in the law, you can go after them in a way that the city has available to them.
Okay. And Mr. Sheriff, I can add a little bit more to that. One of the areas that I think is often problematic is when a tenant who is income qualified all of a sudden gets a raise, they get a promotion, they start making more money, and they're no longer income qualified. So the owner of the rental project, they have a unit that is no longer compliant with the affordable housing agreement. So there's one of two options. They either have to tell that tenant that they need to move on so that they can replace the tenant with someone who's income qualified, or they have to replace the unit. For example, if you have 12 units and 2 need to be affordable, we can provide flexibility so that it can be any of the 2 within the unit, but they always have to have at least the 2 at any given time. That sometimes does have some periods of time where there may be some overlap, and that's why you need to continue to check on an annual basis, so that when there is a new unit that's available, that they're able to make sure that that person then qualifies.
Okay, well, I think that's a great overview, and John's comments are well received. Before we move on, I guess the question is, does anybody have any questions for either Sherry or John at this point? If not, we can move on to the item C, ADU presentation. So let me just go down real quick. Vice Chair Graff, any more questions?
None here, thank you.
All right, Commissioner Dever.
No, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Santos.
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Commissioner Steinbach.
No, thank you.
All right, Commissioner Stevens.
I have several issues with how this is written from a real estate point of view and a homeowner's. I mean, this is great for tenants, and I've worked with these a lot, but I don't think this is something that we can solve or get through in this meeting with all the other stuff that's going on. So, I have reservations about how the bonuses and incentives and how you're taking it out of the city's control, basically, as to the projects that are being built in the city. So that's all. I don't want to go into all my questions.
Okay, well, just on that comment, does either John or Sherry have a quick response to that?
Well, I would just say that, we sometimes share the same concerns that the state is obligating or mandating us to do some things that we're not always comfortable with. But saying that, we still have responsibilities for supporting affordable housing. So trying to find that equilibrium, trying to find that balance is important. The Planning Commission does still have some, I guess, jurisdiction or some ability to do some fact finding before decisions are made. While Laura indicated there are some things that are pretty set, like parking, there are other things that may be subject to some negotiation, because ultimately you're trying to create the community culture, you're trying to create a community standard. And a lot of times developers who are proposing affordable housing, they want to make sure that their project is still successful. Because they're developing in an area where, hopefully they're going to be owning for a while, or the subsequent owners, will have responsibilities. So they want it to be a win-win. So the first couple of projects that will come before you, we'll go through what the state law requires. I think Laura's done a very good job of that already with this presentation, but we'll make sure that it's well identified, so where, the waivers are, where the concessions are, and ultimately what the applicant is really seeking. Sometimes people ask for more than what they really need. Sometimes they really need everything that is part of their application, but that's part of that public hearing process. I think the one thing to remind the commission of is that when we start doing notices to the community, sometimes community members don't understand state density bonus law, and they get very frustrated that we're lessening the standards, that we're making things worse for their neighborhood because we're not requiring enough parking. So knowing that you've got this state law, it's meant to give a little reinforcement for the Planning Commission, so that it's not just your decision, you're really upholding requirements that we have to comply with. So that's why we're kind of giving you a primer today, so that you're more ready when these projects actually come before you.
Got it. Okay, that's a very good response, because I was going to say we can only do so much. Our hands are tied, and when the new, when state law trumps everything that we can do, we got to follow state law.
Right.
Okay, and then lastly, Commissioner Thompson, any questions?
Not as to the state density bonus law.
Okay, great. So let's thank you, Sherry and John, for your comments and the presentation, Sherry. So let's go on to item C, which is the ADU and JADU.
All right, we've got a presentation for this as well. So to begin with, though, with ADUs, I think the commission's pretty familiar with the accessory dwelling unit laws. These actually have been in place for many years. In fact, I think they started in the 80s. Laura's become kind of a guru when it comes to these laws. She's got them all tagged and highlighted, so she knows all of the requirements. So if I forget something, I always go to her and she'll correct me. But I think what's interesting is that, the state recognized that our single family neighborhoods were really kind of prime areas where we could allow for more housing. And that's why they started the ADU laws, because they felt it was a less expensive way to be able to provide infill development, where homeowners would be able to provide for what we used to call granny flats, or just kind of second units. But over the years, the laws have changed. Even as most recently in January of 21, they provided some more changes to ADU laws. What then happened is that the state developed something even in addition, which is SB 9. And this became effective as of January 1, 2022. And many cities have looked at SB 9, they've already done urgency ordinances, or they've just decided they'll comply with the state law. For Lomita, we've been looking at it as well. And before Greg left, Greg recommended that we also develop an urgency ordinance, which we brought to the city council. Now, SB 9 kind of layers on top of the ADU laws. And I think it's interesting because it then goes beyond the ADU laws by allowing for subdivision. So we wanted to provide you some information tonight, because the council did adopt an urgency ordinance, which means we will be developing a permanent ordinance, which will be coming back to the Planning Commission. So let's go ahead and go through this presentation, and hopefully we'll answer some questions. So what SB 9 does is it requires the ministerial approval of either a 2-unit housing development or an urban lot split, which is actually a subdivision. Now, in the past, when we've had subdivision, it's always come before the Planning Commission. It's always been a public hearing. There's always been a process, but the state has required us to now have a ministerial process, which really only goes through staff. And that would be splitting an existing residential property that's single family. And for us, that's either the A1 or the R1 zone. You automatically can subdivide. Or if you don't want to subdivide at a minimum, you can build at least 2 housing units. So let's go through some of the details of what you can do with SB9. So SB9 says that we have to approve, but we can have some objective standards. And those objective standards, we have to have them in writing so people can read them and kind of understand what it is that we're asking for. But whatever we do, we have to allow for the units to be at least 800 square feet in size. So that's a minimum size. And there are some very significant limitations on how we can deny a project. One would be if they don't meet the objective standards or if there are specific adverse impacts on public health and safety. That's something typically a building official might be able to make if there's something unusual with the property. But for the most part in Lomita, we think the objective standards will be the primary, I guess, measuring that we'll be using with these SB9 projects. There are some limitations on what we can regulate. For example, both setbacks and parking requirements are specifically identified in SB9, and we have to adhere to those standards. Next slide. So what properties are affected by SB9? The law says that it's any single family zone property. So in Lomita, we have both the A1 and the R1 zone. So R1 clearly is single family, no question. A1 is actually defined by Lomita as being an agricultural zone. And if you look at our general plan, it really talks about being an agricultural property. But in reality, over time, it really has transitioned into a single family zone. So it would be somewhat disingenuous not to include A1 as part of our analysis. And in talking with the city attorney's office, we all agreed that we really do need to have both A1 and R1 within any SB9 ordinance. So all single family zones would be affected, but there are some that would be exempted if there's an environmentally sensitive area. In some cases, communities may have wetlands or high fire areas. They may have historic properties. Or in some cases, there may be a property that was subject to an Ellis Act. And that's actually a kind of a technical thing because it's where someone evicts a tenant in order to no longer use the property for residential use. I'm not sure if we will actually find that in Lomita, but it is something that the law allows us to look at. And then additionally, the demolition is generally not permitted for any rental units or deed restricted rental units. Years down the road, if we've had, for example, a density bonus, and we've provided a property that now has affordable covenants on the property, we're not going to allow them to demo those units because they now want to build something different. So those will be some restrictions that will remain in place. Next slide. So here's what the current law says. So if you just use the ADU ordinances, the ADU laws, if you had an existing single family residence, you could carve a portion of the existing house and make a junior accessory dwelling unit. You could also either convert your garage or build a separate accessory structure that could be an accessory dwelling unit. So you go from 1 to 3. I mean, that we've understood for a long time. But what happens under SB9? So if the lot is not being subdivided, SB9 allows for 2 primary dwelling units. So this can be like a traditional duplex. We don't have a lot of those in Lomita, but it's the side-by-side units where they're attached, or it can be 2 units on a lot. If the lot has an existing house on it, it's adding a second unit. And then ADUs and JADUs are still allowed. So what happens if we're subdividing? So if you're subdividing, the homeowner can still build those 2 homes on each of the 2 new lots, which then makes it a total of 4 units. If there's existing units, the homes can be added to result in the maximum of 4 potential units. However, unless we take a specific action, there's also the opportunity to include additional ADUs and JADUs. Next slide. So without having an ordinance in place, this is what can happen. If you can have an existing single family home that can be torn down, you can subdivide the property into 2 and ultimately end up with 8 units. So that's much more intensive than I think most communities are wanting to have within their single family neighborhoods. So what I have seen is that many communities are adopting ordinances and or at least urgency ordinance to make sure that these additional ADUs and JADUs are not part of the equation if there's a subdivision. Next slide. So our past experience so far with accessory dwelling units, and maybe Laura could even comment on this as well, is that we've had a lot of interest and there has been quite a few applications that have been coming in. But for the most part, it hasn't really been that overwhelming. What would you say, Laura?
I would say we get plenty of applications, but when it comes time for building permit issues, it drops off to less than 50%. So I like to say that property owners may have something called HGTVIs, where they think it's simpler and easier to do than it really is, or less expensive. And ultimately, it drops off significantly.
Right. So, for the most part, I think we've been able to manage the ADUs. But our housing element does want us to enhance the opportunities for more development within the A1 and the R1 zones. And as we discussed during the public hearing process for the housing element, we recognize that we have a lot of oversized properties. And certainly, ADUs might be one of the solutions that a property owner will seek. But SB 9 now provides, I guess, more tools in the toolbox. So they may look to subdivide and to do other things to be able to create more units. But I think there's still an opportunity for Lomita to maybe come up with a third option. So not an ADU, not an SB 9, but because we have these oversized properties, maybe we can create some development standards that will allow for larger units, but units that have more of the traditional standards of parking, setbacks, and open space. Next slide. But to begin with, we still have to address the ADUs and the SB 9 because that's already on our plate effective January 1. I know that there's been a couple of developers and property owners who've come in at least asking for information, but no applications have been submitted yet for the SB 9. But I think it's only a matter of time. The adoption of the urgency ordinance has pretty much, I think, squelched some of the, I guess, the lofty ideas that some of these developers may have had, because we've put some standards that are very objective, but they're very tough. For example, one of the requirements is that there's a prohibition for the ADUs and JADUs if there's an urban lot split. I think that's pretty straightforward because I think most developers, at least I would hope that they wouldn't want to come in and develop 8 units where there used to be just one house. But they typically do want to provide for larger units. And the current urgency ordinance limits the size of the new units to 800 square feet. Now, if there is an existing accessory building that they're looking to convert, they're allowed to make it up to 800 square feet. So there are some modifications that can happen, but typically we can always keep it to 800. We are also looking to keep a 1-story height limitation. SB 9 doesn't limit the height at this point, so it could be 2-story units. And similar to ADUs, there's only a 4-foot side yard and rear yard requirement. So by having 2-story units so close to the property line, we think that might be problematic for neighborhood character and for kind of privacy issues. So we've put that as a limitation. There is a requirement of only 1 parking space per unit that's created, and these are through the exemptions as required under SB 9. And this again is very similar to what the ADU laws provide for. I think the only difference is that they talk about the the high quality transit corridors, but it is, I believe it's a 1/4 mile walking distance from the actual bus stop or transit stop. So there's some ways that we can evaluate just to make sure that they're compliant before we start waiving any of the parking requirements. But what is unusual with SB 9 too is that there's a requirement for owner occupancy if there's a lot split application. And this is a means of trying to protect neighborhoods from, I guess, gentrification or from developers just trying to come in and quickly make a profit. It'll be a little bit difficult to, I guess, monitor, but there will be deed restrictions that are placed on properties for owner occupancy. Next slide. These are also new standards that we have placed within the urgency ordinance, and it's not something that we've typically done in the past. For example, we're looking for a maximum lot coverage not to exceed 50%. You know, this is something Laura and I have talked about quite a bit, and same with Lemesis, that depending on the way housing is developed and the way that accessory either units or structures are provided for, you can slowly have a single family property that just gets consumed with development. And there's very little open space left, very little green space left. So by providing this 50% rule, you know, we're hoping that we can encourage two-story where appropriate, but certainly encourage the size and location of structures so that we still maintain open space. And that's important as it pertains to landscape and to trees. We are providing a minimum standard for landscaping. I think it's 225 square feet, and there's some minimum dimensions that are required. So it's not just like the side yard setbacks or the little areas that are between two buildings. We're looking for something that's sufficient enough that it provides meaning, that it has true value. SB 9 also prohibits short-term rentals of units. Now, Lomita is not explicit in terms of prohibition on short-term rentals, but because we do not allow for it as a permitted use, it's interpreted that it's not permitted. But SB 9 requires us to be explicit in the ordinance, and we will do that. There's also a requirement that the second units and both units of a 2-unit development, if they're rented, they can only be rented at affordable rents for lower income households for a minimum of 30 years. Now, some cities have been requiring the 55-year covenant because that's what you typically provide for affordable housing. I recommended 30 years because again, this is a very small unit. It's only 800 square feet. I didn't know if we wanted to be as restrictive in requiring such a long period of time. And also, I think something that we'll have to consider when the permanent ordinance is coming through with the Planning Commission, we should really measure whether or not we need to have an affordability requirement for these units if they're maintained at 800 square feet. And I say that for 2 reasons. One is that if it's 800 square feet, it's likely by default not going to be a real high-priced unit, right? And secondly, from an administrative perspective, having to monitor a lot of individual property owners that have, 1 unit or 2 units that are subject to these affordability requirements, that may be quite a bit of work. And so we just need to understand whether or not that is, a policy decision that both the Planning Commission and City Council would like to adhere to, or whether or not there's other ways that we can look at it. I tend to think that when we come through with the permanent ordinance, that it's not necessarily going to be something that I'm recommending to the commission, but I wanted to at least include it in the urgency ordinance, primarily because when SB 9 was going forward, one of the main reasons that they talked about SB 9 was for the need of developing affordable housing. Well, how do you assure that it's affordable unless you have covenants? So that's why I put it in there, and many other cities did. But again, we can really discuss that and have a more thoughtful understanding of what the needs might be. Okay, next slide. So the City Council on February 28th did adopt an urgency ordinance. So that has been attached to your, I think that was forwarded to you with your agenda. So hopefully you've had a chance to look at that. Now, under state law, urgency ordinances are only valid for 45 days. And before the expiration of the urgency ordinance, the city has an option to first do a 10-day report where we basically identify what we think the issues are and why we need to go forward with the urgency ordinance if we want to extend it. And then we need to conduct a public hearing and actually extend the urgency ordinance if we think we need more time to develop a permanent standard. So what my timeline is at this point is that we will be going to the City Council on April 5th to extend the urgency ordinance. And state law allows us to extend for another, 10 months and 15 days. So it basically would provide for a year of urgency ordinance. I'm hoping that if the council does extend the urgency ordinance, it will actually come back to the planning commission fairly quickly. Because I think there are a lot of things that would just be helpful for us to kind of, discuss and make sure we understand, what the priorities are. So I'm hoping by probably May or June, we'll start a public hearing process with the planning commission. And I think that's going to have kind of a 3-tier approach. First off is with accessory dwelling units. There's been a lot of changes in state law. Our current ordinances within our municipal code are not up to date. So we have to create some changes with ADU standards regardless. In addition to that, I think adopting some permanent standards for SB 9, one, certainly with the subdivision to make sure we don't have ADUs and JADUs, so we don't end up with these 8 units, being provided for on one property. And then third, looking at what we can do to incentivize property owners within A1 and R1 to develop housing that may be more in keeping with the community standards. And you've heard me talk about this before, and I think the commission has talked about this, that we would like to improve opportunities for home ownership, which means that we may develop standards for subdividing these larger A1 and R1 properties, but at the same time, making sure that parking and open space and setbacks are adhered to more similarly to what we currently have for our single family zones. And I think by doing so, rather than property owners thinking that the only choice they have is an SB 9 or an ADU choice, we may actually be able to get some slightly larger homes, but homes that have more of the amenities that we would like to see in Lomita. And once that happens, I don't think they would then revert back to try to get an SB 9 or an ADU type of development. They'll be using up their property in a way that hopefully is more market driven, that provides higher values, and ultimately provides a higher quality of living for the entire neighborhood. So that's kind of our work plan for the next couple of months. So wanted to bring the Planning Commission up to speed with that so that you would start looking at some of these underlying ordinances and then be prepared for the discussions when we start the public hearing process. So I know Lemesis is also working on a kind of I guess it's a fact sheet. And we'll have that out probably in the next week or two so that the community is aware of it. But if we know that the Planning Commission and City Council is looking to do this 3-tiered approach, we also want to be proactive in telling all of our property owners about those options too, because we don't want them to develop something that's rather small and maybe not really meeting their needs, only to find out in 6 months or a year that we have these better opportunities available for them. So with that, that completes my report, and I'm happy to answer any further questions.
Well, Sherry, thank you very much. That's an excellent presentation and as quick a summary as can be done without boring everybody to sleep, I think. But with that being said, I think what I'd like to do is see if there's any other questions or comments from the commission. So Vice Chair Graff, any questions, comments?
Yeah, I've got one. We're talking about SB 9 and all the variables and the ADUs and the JADUs and splitting the lots and, all this housing, and everything. And I know we've got some very large lots in the city of Lomita that are R1 or A1. But can you explain to us, if you're going to split a lot and build more additional residents or ADUs or whatever on that, is there a minimum size that the lot has to be? Or, can it be, as long as it's big enough to put a house on, you can put a house on it? Now, does that mean you still have to maintain only 50% coverage? I'm a little confused, Sherry. Can you offer some insight to that?
Sure.
Right now we've got a 5,000 square foot lot, okay, for residential. Now, what happens under SB 9 or whatever with regard to somebody's got a 5,000 square foot lot? Can they split that in two and build all these units?
The answer is yes. SB 9 does allow for that. Let's use the 5,000 square foot lot as an example. So SB 9 says that you could subdivide into two. The size of the properties at a minimum, you have to have the smallest property be 40% of what the original size of the property had been. So if you had 5,000 square feet, it would be 40% of that. Now, what SB 9 also provides for, though, is that for those cities that have even smaller lots, you can create a lot as small as 1,200 square feet. And that doesn't really apply to Lomita, because I think for the most part, our lots are not smaller than 5,000. I think there may be maybe a few isolated circumstances, but really none that I've seen. Most of our properties tend to be at least 5,000, but probably 6,000, 7,000 square feet in size. But then we have some that are 10, 15, 20,000 square feet in size. So either for Laura or Lemesis, have you seen anything that's under 5,000 typically for our A1 or R1 zones?
We've had one property that came to planning commission a few years ago at 3,000 square feet, and it was for a setback modification. So potentially it could be at 1,200, or yeah, potentially it could be at 1,200, but that's the only case I can think of.
But I'm trying to understand if that's the case, let's just say it's we're using 5,000 because that's the minimum now. So you split it and you have two lots at 2,500 square feet. Does it, with what you were presenting to us under the urgency ordinance and the other things we were talking about also, does that mean that you can't have more than 50% of the property have buildings on it?
Yes, except. So what the state says is that you can have these objective standards as long as the property owner can develop at least an 800 square foot unit. So if the property owner came back to us and said, well, at 50%, there's no way I could get 800 square feet, then we would have to make some concessions. But for the most part, we believe that they should be able to meet the standard. A lot of it depends on what the pre-existing condition might be. If there's already an existing house and they're trying to do that second unit at 800 square feet, that may be where the 50% might become problematic. But we would look at that on a case-by-case basis.
If I could add one thing, there's oftentimes the possibility of using the air rights above the existing primary unit if it's single story. So really the lot coverage, I think as Sherry mentioned, is an important standard because it is providing for the meaningful open space, meaningful green space that that could otherwise be lost if we don't implement some sort of lot coverage standard.
So did that help answer your question?
Partially.
Okay.
We'll all learn more as we go. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair Graff. Commissioner Dever, any questions at this time?
No, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Santos.
None, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Steinbach.
Yeah, I have a quick comment and a question. So I think it's important to remember, based on Vice Chair Graff's question, that when he talked about a lot split, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're split 50-50. Lot splits can come in a multitude of different sizes. So, but my question is going to be, since there is not any that I know of built-in standards that we have now for any type of relief from prevailing setback and corner lots and some of the different type of lots that we have now, are we going to build in some relief, or is that going to be something that comes back to planning? I mean, I know they're saying that side yard and setbacks you can get some relief there, but in a lot of the neighborhoods, they're built as far as they can go right now. And I understand up is easy. The JADUs are a pretty simple thing. You can take your den on the back and turn it into one pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. And you can add over the top of your garage, you can add over the top of your house. I mean, that's the easy way out. But so I'm thinking about, we have a lot of, short blocks in Lomita, where we have just corner properties, and they're very constrained with the visibility triangle and 10-foot side yards and setbacks and so forth. So the long way of getting at it, are we proposing then to have some type of standards that offer relief in that scenario, or are we just going to go with what we have already?
Well, Commissioner Steinbach, that's a very good question. So under the current urgency ordinance, we are recommending that we maintain increased setbacks where we have jurisdiction. So if you look at SB 9, it talks about the side yard and the rear yard having to be 4 feet, but it still allows us to maintain the lot, the front yard, as well as a yard that would be adjoining a public right-of-way or a street. So we have bigger setbacks for those areas. And we are not recommending that we reduce those at this point, because again, there's that community character. If you start having units come too close to the street, that's not going to be consistent with all of the other properties.
Right.
But I think there are still other areas that we might still be able to play with. And for the most part, I think the ability to go to the second story is probably the best thing that we can push development towards, if they're meeting some of these increased standards for open space, setbacks, trees, the things that we find of value. So it'll be a little bit of a recipe that we'll be coming up with. And I really recommend that if you haven't already done so, read through the urgency ordinance and then start comparing it to what our current ordinance provides for in terms of residential design and density. And you'll start seeing some of those subtle differences. And I think also looking at the staff report for the city council, hopefully that helped to explain some of that. But it's a little bit of a push and pull relationship, because there are some things that we have to maintain as concessions because SB 9 requires it. But there's other things that we can use to incentivize what we think is kind of like working with kids. It's like, you want to encourage the good behavior. So you give rewards for that, and that's kind of how I see zoning in the A1 and the R1 zones, is that we will reward property owners for doing better things that are good, not only for their property, but really for the neighborhoods. And those things that we don't find so desirable, we're going to kind of squelch it down and say, well, you can only have 800 square feet and it can only be 1 story.
I appreciate your candor on that. And I think that's more what I was looking for. If, there are so many properties in Lomita that are strange. I mean, being a resident as long as I have been here, I remember when the lots were just gigantic and we have moved animals and I've been here almost 70 years and I've seen the evolution, but I've also seen that the city has always taken a thoughtful approach to the character of our 1.9 square miles. And I'd like to see that we continue with that. But also I want to see that if somebody comes in and there's something that they want to do that just doesn't fit, that we don't just say, no, you can't do it. I think we need to be very careful and see if there are some ways that we can make it work, as long as it's in the benefit of not only the neighborhood and the person that's doing the development, but in the character of the city. I think it's really critical that we keep an eye on what we do there. We're all sitting here right now and we're all thinking about our neighborhood that we live in and where does this work and where doesn't it work. And I have, where I'm sitting right now, there are some very odd properties. So I think it's going to be really interesting how it comes out. So my last question then, Sherry, is, and I think I know the answer to it, but I think it needs to be asked, is how deep of a dive did we do in looking at what our existing housing stock is and the formation of the properties and neighborhoods before we do this? In other words, are we going to paint ourselves into a corner, or have we really taken a look at it? Because that, to me, is critical. If we create something we can't use, then it's worthless.
Yeah, and Commissioner, I think that's a good point. Because if you look at the character of our neighborhoods, they really vary because the laws have changed over time too. When I've looked at just simply looking at the aerials and then looking at the assessor maps to see how properties were subdivided and how they were developed, I find that you know, things change over time. You know, there used to be laws that were for second dwelling units. And it was very common in Lomita and just about everywhere in the county that if you had an oversized piece of property, of course you're going to have a second unit, maybe even a third. So
Granny
we have
flat.
lots of properties already with those, right?
Yep.
And then there was a period of time where the city allowed for a more permissive type of subdivision where you could provide flag lots. And so if you had a really long property, you could subdivide it so that there would be a little narrow driveway, but it would be its, you know, its own property, and it would lead back to the second and third lots. And when we come back to you, we'll show you some assessor maps that really illustrate those types of subdivisions. Now, the city ultimately took those laws off the books. And I think they may have done it because there was some community opposition. You know, residents were saying, hey, I've lived in Lomita for 70 years and there used to be agriculture here. And now these people are all building houses. And so it kind of got tightened up, right? So they couldn't do it. Now the state's saying, okay, look, cities, you've gotten far too restrictive on your standards. You need to now come up with standards where they can subdivide, where they can provide these second and third units. So we're kind of going back to the past, but trying to do it in a more appropriate way. I actually don't have a problem with flag lots as long as there are CC&Rs, there's controls to make sure that they're maintained and that the property owners know their obligations to work together as a team. So if you look at the urgency ordinance, you'll see that we put some standards in there in terms of how you can subdivide. And just a very simple example, if you have a 50-foot wide lot and you divide it exactly in half, so you've got 2,500 and 2,500, do we really want to see 25-foot wide lots along our streets? Do we want to see somebody building a house that has a 2-car garage facing that 25-foot wide lot and the street? So all you see is a garage door and you lose all your street parking. You don't even see where the front door is. I mean, frankly, I don't see that as being Lomita. That might be a beach community where you have those types of row house developments. So we've actually established a standard that you have to have at least a minimum frontage. Otherwise, you have to revert to a flag lot, because we'd rather see a front and back house rather than two little skinny houses facing onto the street. And I know Laura and Lemesis were very concerned about this because you start losing all your street parking. And we already know that that's a problem. So you combine SB 9 where there may be exemptions where they don't have to provide parking, and you remove the street parking too. That seems like a little bit of double jeopardy. So we're going to really rely on the Planning Commission as well to, you know, think about how your neighborhoods work and what we should be doing in order to create the best standard. We've spent hours already just doing this urgency ordinance, but it's not perfect, and it's not going to be the final, you know, the final ordinance that goes forward. I'm sure there's going to be some tweaks. So we look forward to getting your input. In fact, if you're looking at this ordinance and you come up with some ideas, please feel free to email me or call me. Because I'm trying to kind of interpret things based on what I understand and what I know about Lomita, but you may have something that I just completely overlooked. So again, please feel free to be my eyes and my ears.
Okay. Hey, Bob, that's excellent questions. And Sherry, thank you for those answers. Moving down the list, Commissioner Stevens, any other questions or comments?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, and Commissioner Thompson?
No, not at this time. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. I guess my only comment would be, let's see what comes out of Sherry's office, and we'll just, you know, get as much information as possible. I do have one comment though, or question. Is there a possibility, if you want us to look at the urgency ordinance, which I've done already and looked at it briefly, is there a possibility we can get the existing ordinance to compare apples to apples?
Sure. I mean, the entire municipal code is online. You know, it's available on the city's website. But what we can do is we can do an excerpt from the existing code.
Perfect.
And just provide that to you, so you don't have to
Perfect, okay.
fishing too much.
Yeah, and that way everybody can kind of see side by side if it's in print or on, you know, whatever it is. That way we don't have to go through 5,000 pages.
Yeah, believe me, I don't like having to do that either.
That's fantastic, Sherry. Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Okay,
Sure.
very good. So I believe, unless there's any other comments or questions, that concludes everything under item 5. Quick review, we talked about the housing element, the density bonus law, the ADU, JADU, and then just a quick review of SB 9 and the urgency ordinance. So I believe we're done with item 5. So with that being said, I think we're going to move on to item 6. Communication regarding any city council actions. And I believe this might be Sherry. Are you up or is it Laura?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to have Laura talk a little bit about a program that we've just initiated.
So on March 7th, actually let me start over. Last year in November, council authorized the creation of 2 programs using American Rescue Plan Act funds. One is a facade improvement program. It's a forgivable loan of up to $25,000 for businesses that can show that they've had an adverse impact due to COVID, and they're located in any commercial zone, but they targeted specific businesses, and it would, so it's for restaurants, it's for basically food service industry, so restaurants, breweries, bars. It's for general retail, and then nonprofit organizations that may be located in the commercial zones. And then the second program is a jobs creation program. And that is a forgivable loan of up to $10,000. And that is, again, for any, almost any business. And it also includes, in addition to the aforementioned businesses, office uses and manufacturing businesses that create a new position for an individual who is from a low-income household. And those applications are on the city's website. And on March 8th, the city hosted participated in a webinar hosted by the chamber. And on our website is that link. So if anyone wants to get information about that, they can look at the webinar, download the application. The summary sheets are up there. If you know of somebody who might be interested, let them know about it. I am the main point of contact for these programs, and the applications close on April 21st. Again, these are forgivable loans. So it'll be funded once council approves the applications immediately. And so there's not like a reimbursement thing, but they do have to document and substantiate that the loan was used for the qualifying purpose. Is there any questions I can answer about that might be brewing?
I don't see any. Okay. I don't see anybody with any questions on that. So anything else, Laura?
None on that item, no.
Okay. Okay. So let's go to item 7, project status update. I know in the past we've received the status report from Greg, but I don't know if we still have that coming our way. It wasn't in this packet. So Sherry, do you have any comments on that?
I was gonna say, we should have made him do that before he left on Friday. So missed an opportunity there.
Yeah.
No, unfortunately, that was not prepared for this agenda, but we'll prepare it for your next agenda.
Okay, super. Thank you. Okay, other matters, item number 8, staff item. Any announcements from staff?
No, just that you're stuck with me for a little while.
Well, it's a pleasure. I will say that.
Sherry,
Welcome.
one thing, were we going to discuss going hybrid?
We can discuss that. Actually, I was going to put that on for the next agenda.
Okay.
So just so the commission is aware, we've been doing Zoom meetings, and we know that things are starting to, I guess, loosen up a little bit. So on your next agenda, we will place an item to discuss whether or not you want to go hybrid, fully in person, or continue with Zoom. We're going to be looking to see what the council does, and then we'll provide some recommendations or at least some options for the commission to consider.
Okay. Well, that takes one of the items off of my planning commission items. Okay. All right, so if that's the case, then we'll go to item 9, planning commissioner items. And since you just answered the first one I had, I'll skip down to Vice Chair Graff. Anything?
Yes, regarding, there was an item that was discussed during our November 15th meeting on the safety element. And staff was directed by the commission, and it was agreed to. When we had our discussion, there was a question about the concern of the safety and the emergency water situation from the Cypress facility. And I can't remember if at that point whether Carla was still on the meeting or not, but we were supposed to have gotten as soon as, and the minutes say as soon as possible, an email on what the status is of what's going on at the facility, the status of the updates, the new filtration, and more importantly, what the plan was to do once it's operational and how it is going to support the emergency needs of the city. And we never received anything on that. Is there some way that we can have staff look into having that information provided to us?
Absolutely, Mr. Commissioner. We will contact the public safety staff as well as the emergency safety staff and make sure that that information is forwarded to the commission.
We appreciate that very much, Sherry.
Yep.
And I have one other item that seemed to pop up with the transmission of documents for this meeting. And I know that Linda was kind of pulling her hair out because the format that she provided the documents in, I don't think anybody could open them and read them. I know I couldn't, and Steve Camarada said he couldn't. And it's just very perplexing that why we made a change. And I know Linda said that a change was made for some particular reason, but is there a reason why we cannot have the documents provided the way they have been provided for all of our previous meetings? Everything was great. We get we get the agenda and we click on the Zoom meeting and everything would be there and all of the documents that are associated would be there. So is there some way that we can get an understanding as to what's going to transpire there?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the commission, we can look into that with the city clerk's office. I believe that Linda has certain software that she's using, which is Mindcast. And if she's sending it using that, it's a little bit different than what you're used to. But I'll follow up with Linda and we'll make sure that either that works or there's another way that she can transmit the agendas.
Okay, that, and the other documents too, because I know
Right.
that we used to get them in PDF format. And it was
Right.
really simple, but, and I don't know what software you just mentioned, but I searched for it with the suffix to it, and Microsoft didn't even know what it was. So it's just a little perplexing to me as to see if we could get that straightened out, please.
Okay. We'll look into that.
Thank you very much. That's all I have.
All right, Commissioner Graff, I do have one comment. I'm going to go back to the November 15th minutes so that everybody remembers this. We did have a discussion of the safety and emergency preparedness in regards to the water supply and the not the reservoir, but the storage tank up on Cypress. I believe it was on Cypress. And the item in the minutes said that direction was made to staff to provide the commission with an update on the reservoir and the filtration system. So that was both items as soon as possible. So just to remind them, it was in the November minutes if you need to go back. I did find my notes and it did mention in here that Carla was on at the time of the meeting and she was supposed to prepare some kind of report or an update for us. So just to jog everyone's memory. Okay, with that being said, let me keep on going down. Commissioner Dever,
Yeah, I'm still here.
any items from you?
No, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Monica. Commissioner Santos,
I'm good, Mr. Chairman.
okay, thank you, sir. Commissioner Steinbach,
I have nothing to add. Thank you.
okay, Commissioner Stevens,
I have nothing. I just want to thank Ms. Gardner for joining the meeting tonight and bringing her issues to another forum.
okay, very good. And I believe we mentioned that earlier, so that's good. And then Commissioner Thompson,
No items for me. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
okay, beautiful. Okay, so we are on item 10, commissioners to attend the following city council meetings, Tuesday, April 5th and Tuesday, April 19th. So don't all raise your hands first or fast, but
I was looking at the calendar.
I can do the 5th.
okay, so Commissioner Santos, the 5th,
I can do the 19th.
excellent, and Commissioner Stevens on the 19th, okay. Very good. Okay, I think we have one more item, and I'm not sure if there it is right here. Item number 11. Selection of chair and vice chair for the 22-23 term. So anybody want to make a comment, a suggestion, recommendation, a motion?
I'll make a motion.
Okay, Commissioner Steinbeck, go ahead.
I move that our current chair and vice chair retain their same positions.
I second that.
Second it.
Yeah, there was a vote for you.
Wow,
I learned how to do that a long time ago.
yeah, okay. Well, I knew it was coming. I just didn't know how fast it was going to come out of your.
The thing is Bob is afraid.
Hey, been there, done that.
I know.
All of
No,
us, yep.
I'm honored to still serve as the chair. Mike, are you still up to doing vice chair?
I have no problems at all. It's a pleasure.
You
Okay,
guys do
well-
a great job, really.
well-
You really keep us on track and I appreciate it.
Well,
Thank you, Bob.
That's good to hear. Thank you, Bob. So there's a motion, and I believe, who was the second? I didn't see it.
Everybody seconded.
Everybody. I'm gonna put everybody. Okay, all in, Madam Deputy City Clerk, I guess you can do the roll call on that one.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
Just for purposes of the minutes, who wants to be the seconder?
The
I do.
seconder,
I think Jim did first.
Jim,
We're all pretty fast.
all right.
I'll
You were
do it.
so fast, I didn't even hear you.
why
right.
don't you just do second all?
Wow.
No, because the MSP, the P will be 7-0, so, or. All right,
All right, so we'll do a roll call now and we'll start with Commissioner Dever,
Yes,
Commissioner Santos,
Yes.
Commissioner Steinbach,
Oh, heck, yes.
Commissioner Stevens,
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson,
Yes.
Vice Chair Graff,
Yes.
and Chair Camerata.
yes. All right.
Thank you,
believe that-
guys, really.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you.
My
It's
pleasure.
an honor.
Yeah, you
And I
guys did
believe
great.
we are done. And so with that being said, the next meeting of the Planning Commission will be scheduled for Monday, April 11th, 2022 at 6 PM. And I believe unless anything's changed as of now, that still will be via Zoom. Is that correct?
That's what we're planning for.
Via Zoom. Okay. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved.
Second.
Second.
Okay, we are adjourned at 7:39. So everybody have a good evening. First of all, before we do adjourn, I do want to recognize Nemesis because I don't think she was properly introduced at the beginning of the meeting, and I should have brought her in at the beginning. So if everybody doesn't no nemesis. She's working over in is Sherry's office or Laura's office?
Well, she works in community development, so she is
Okay.
our assistant planner. So you
Okay.
hopefully will start seeing more of her.
Okay, well, welcome.
Very
And then,
good.
Hi, thank you.
And
Welcome.
then a big thank you to John for sticking through the whole meeting. I know he only had a bit part, but thank you, John.
Of course, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commission.
All right, guys.
Thank you, John.
That's a wrap. Good night.
Very good
Thanks,
meeting,
guys.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Good to go, Commissioner.
Bye, everyone.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Good evening.